Last hour. What I want to do this hour is kind of reserved it for trying to talk a little bit about today, connecting a little bit the era of martyrdom that we talked about, and talk a little bit about our present context and what we're facing today. I kind of started a bit with that supposed quote from Mark Twain, right? That history doesn't repeat itself, but it does often rhyme with itself, right? So I don't think, this age that we're in, often called the post-Christian world, it's not the same as the pre-Christian world that we just looked at, right? Before the era of martyrdom, before Constantine and Theodosius I. But there is a kind of resonance, I think, between the pre-Christian world and the post-Christian world. So I want to try to make a little bit of that connection. I also am just going to go with presenting a little bit of my opinion. I have to say it's not doctrine here, but certainly my opinion kind of why things are going the way they're going or what's behind it. Bring maybe just at least my perspective as I've read a few things in this. I've worked with this with a number of texts, more modern, about kind of diagnosing our present context. So I want to bring some of that to you. You are free to disagree with me, so it's not doctrine here, but certainly my interaction with some of these texts and what I think theologically is kind of going on in our midst. And then talk a little bit about how we can maybe learn from the martyrs about how do we respond, what's important about what we are doing as a church, how we are preaching the gospel, how we're living the Christian faith, those kinds of things. So that's what we want to try to do here today. And I want to begin a little bit with that terminology of post-Christian that gets thrown around a little bit in literature today. We're in a post-Christian society. And certainly there's a truth to that. I certainly want to recognize that. We are coming into an age, I think we would say, in which Christianity is losing its power in the world. And what I mean by that isn't just, I'm not talking about losing the gospel or something, or just losing who we are as a church, but rather we're losing the mechanisms of earthly power. Right? For a long time, I think this always kind of informs us, even the Reformation grows up within a Western world in which Christianity had the powers of the law. Right? I don't know if you've ever heard the kind of classical powers of the law. That is, the powers of legislation, legislative power, the power of distributive justice, that is the power to distribute goods and the like, retributive justice, right? The power to go against evil and punish people, punitive power. Those powers that we kind of associate with the state and with government. In the West, Christianity held those seats of power for a long time. Okay? All the way, you might go back to Constantine and Theodosius I, right, at the end of the 4th century. So all the way through kind of the Reformation, and things start to change, right, with the Enlightenment and those kinds of things. So we have been used to, and I think in America as well, used to kind of Christians having those governmental powers of the law, you might say, right? We are, post-Christian designates the fact that we're kind of losing those mechanisms, those powers. Right? Maybe, I'm not here to be a prophet. I don't know where things go. Historians are not good prophets. But I am a historian, so I do want to, I do think you see these kinds of trends, right? That we are, you might put it this way, I think Christianity is very much in a defensive posture. Okay? And how do we react to that? We're coming into much more of a position of weakness in culture, in the powers of the law. And that's where it resonates a little bit with the pre-Christian era. We also saw there a Christianity that was operating in a position of weakness, right? Early Christians did not have the powers of the law, legislative justice, the powers of legislation and retribution and punishment, right? They were very much in a position of weakness. In fact, that's maybe the way to kind of frame the question here a little bit. How do you, maybe this is the big question that I think we face, how do we as a church be the church, preach the gospel, do mission from a position of weakness? It's a big question, a question we probably haven't faced before, right? I always have this conversation with Dr. Schultz a little bit. He's in charge of the missions, PhD in missions degree, and he always talks about the great age of mission, right? Which was kind of the 1700s, 1800s, a lot of mission work going on overseas, but all of that mission work was done from a position of strength. You know, it was American money behind it, there was, power behind it, that certainly, has an advantage, right? That you can kind of go and when you bring the resources that we could bring and the church in America could bring, it had its effect, right? In terms of mission. But there was also, I think, even a more significant age of mission. I always tell him maybe that's not the great age of mission, but rather the early church, the year of martyrdom. In which you do have a church that goes from the beginning of the 2nd century from maybe 1 or 2% of the population to, by the time you get to the end of the year of martyrdom and you get to the Edict of Milan, in which Christianity, we're at a tipping point in terms of Christianity's population in the Roman world, right? To the point where Christianity is going to then take the seats of power. Even before Constantine was taking some of those seats of power within cities in the ancient world in the 3rd century. I mean, that's a startling kind of growth that took place, right? And transformation that took place at that time. So, and I do think the early church teaches us some things about how do you do mission from a position of weakness. Okay? So you might keep that question in mind. But what I want to do here for a little bit is, what do we mean by post-Christian? How did we get to where we are now? Okay, and what has kind of led us down? I want to start with that post-Christian terminology because I do think to speak of it simply as post-Christian is a little bit, well, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of a narcissistic perspective, right? To call it post-Christian is simply to speak from a Christian perspective and then to lament what has been lost. Right? We are recognizing with that language that we're kind of losing, right? And we're on the defensive or we're on the retreat. So it's post-Christian. The more important question to me in all of this stuff is there is something positive that is replacing Christianity. There is I don't mean good positive, but positive in the sense, what is it that is invading? We are in retreat, but we are not retreating voluntarily. What is it that's kind of moving us out? Okay. And that's been more difficult for historians and those that diagnose what's going on today to kind of pinpoint. What is it in a positive sense that is actually replacing Christianity within the Western world? And I want to talk about that a little bit because I think there's a lot of literature out there that some good things. There's a good book by Carl Trueman, maybe you've heard of, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Interesting book. Many things I like about it. One of the bad things I always think is that he doesn't really approach it from a theological point of view, right? It's always philosophical or it's social point of view. And I think those always kind of come up short. But there is another book that I kind of want to bring some of what I've been a little bit persuaded by him, but some of this is based on actually a Roman Catholic author named Benedict Ashley, who's now passed away, but he kind of comes in the wake of John Paul II's theology of the body, and his book is called The Theologies, plural, of the body, right? And talks about kind of what from that perspective, from an anthropological perspective, what is going on religiously today. And he locates what we are seeing is the increase, the continuing increase of the religion of humanism. Okay. And I want to talk about that kind of development a little bit, of humanism. Maybe some of you have heard of that before. I don't know. Actually, the Reformation is kind of, has in some ways its origin within classical humanism that was already begun within Christianity in the medieval church. So I want to do a little bit just giving you that story. How does that humanism develop? Humanism is simply, you might say, a belief that man, the human being, can achieve excellence. Okay. Now, why was that an important question in the medieval world? What we're talking about in the medieval world is a deeply Christian world. After Constantine, after Theodosius I, Christianity is the religion of Europe, right? You have Christian rulers. And you have the papacy, right? Who is kind of established as the head of both the state and the church, in a way, right? Well, I mean, even the state, even emperors, even Christian rulers had to finally submit to the papal power, right? So one of the reasons you have in your Christmas celebrations, you had to change from 3 magi worshiping Christ to 3 kings. Why would the papacy want 3 kings coming to worship Jesus at the manger? That then becomes a story of what? Earthly kings bowing down to the church, right? And so you get kind of this emphasis on kings rather than what it actually is in the gospel, which is the magi, right? In other words, you have this kind of unification of state and church in a single hierarchy. That's the medieval world, okay? And I won't go into great detail here. But in other words, if you have a vision of the cosmos, of the universe, of reality, that God is the ruler of all things, right? He's at the head of this hierarchy, and that out of him comes this vast, harmonious, cosmic hierarchy, right? With the papacy at the top, the Christian rulers at the top, priests are up there, right? But if you think about how the common man was treated in that, the common man was somewhere between a worm and an angel, right? And you had to kind of learn your place within the hierarchy. And you had to learn your place, and you had to learn to accept your place in that hierarchy. Okay. Now, if you're in a hierarchy, which place would you rather be? You know, hierarchies are really good for what? The people at the top. Okay. So it's very elitist kind of driven, right? You want to be a king. You want to be in the court. You want to be a priest, right? That's why a lot of people wanted to become priests. It's because you move up the hierarchy, right? It's a way of advancing. And in fact, in the medieval world, it was hard to advance. You were born into a position. You know, if you're born a peasant, if you're born a slave, you need to learn to be content with that. Okay. Well, that, needless to say, in the medieval world, you have a rumbling of the laity of the common peasants that is not content with this. Right? They are going to, yes, recognize they're born into a place, but they're not going to stay in that place. So there becomes this sense of man, instead of just passively accepting my place in the hierarchy, that I'm going to actually change my position here. I don't have to receive the world as it is. I can begin to reshape the world. I can contribute to it. I can change the order of things, right? And so this is where you're going to start to get humanism, and you're going to get things like the Renaissance, right? And you're going to get things even like the Reformation and Cartesianism, all of these kinds of things that's going to lead to the Enlightenment. In other words, within universities, they're going to start to say man, in fact, can be active in the world, and he can change things, right? So you're going to get entrepreneurs, you're going to start to get invention, you're going to get families like the Medici family, right, who achieve wealth and power through business and through entrepreneurship, innovation, right? So you always have this battle in the medieval world between the old money people, the people that are born with it, that think they have money by divine right, and then you have these upstart people who have achieved it, right? Through innovation, or like the Medici, you become the papal banker, and you become rich in that regard, right? But now you're starting to get in the Renaissance. Man can, in fact, contribute, start to be much more active, and not merely accept his place within the hierarchy, right? So people like Michelangelo, it's going to affect art, right? I can make the world more beautiful. You're going to have scientific innovation that's going to start to take place, right? And all of this kind of beginning in the universities with what's called humanism, right? Man, in fact, can be active. He can contribute to the order of the world. He can achieve excellence. Okay. Now, what Ashley points to is that humanism that now begins, that has this much more positive view of the human being, it separates from Christianity. It begins within Christianity classically, but it's going to separate. Three big factors here historically that are going to lead us to what we might call secular humanism. Instead of classical humanism or Christian humanism, we're going to get secular humanism with the Enlightenment. Those three big factors, number one is the corruption of authorities, and especially the church. Right? When that hierarchy, when the people at the top are corrupt, it's only going to cause more and more rebellion. Right? Not going to accept what this authority is telling me anymore. Right? Here you might hear the Reformation in that. You have a corrupt hierarchy in the church. I can't trust what they are telling me, and so I'm going to resist it. Okay? So the corruption, not only the corruption of the church hierarchies, but even state governments, right? That why should I bow down to this law when these people are being corrupt, right? Not obeying the law of God in any sense. So that's one big factor. I can't trust authority. So I'm not going to accept what the authority tells me is truth. Authority is no longer a path by which truth is given. Right? We talk about tradition in the church. Truth came by means of traditioning. And that means it came from one generation to the next. It came from pastors throughout the centuries. Well, all of a sudden I can't trust the apparatus of tradition anymore. Okay? And I'm not going to accept it. So I have to think of truth a different way. It doesn't just come from authorities. Another big factor, of course, with the Reformation is the 30 Years' War. Okay. Catholics and Protestants, Christians, at each other's throat. Hard to make an argument. I don't think we realize how brutal that war was and what it did. Hard to make an argument that you are a religion of faith and love when you are killing each other. That's not a great argument to try to make. Right? Christians fighting over earthly power. Right? And a lot of people reacted very negatively to that. Right? Humanism is going to, okay, we can't stay with Christianity. Right? So that's going to encourage the separation of humanism, as it is in the universities, from Christianity. And the third big factor, the positive factor, that leads humanism to separate from Christianity is the success of the sciences. Okay. That is to say, you've had the success of science, the discovery of natural laws, inventions throughout the medieval period that was fueled by the Christian view of the world. But now humanism kind of attaches itself to science, right? That man, through science, can now, in fact, begin to cooperate with natural laws. We can discover the universe, and then we can work with those laws of the universe to contribute, to cooperate, and change the world, right? Achieve excellence, right? And so the sciences are just now at the verge in the Enlightenment of producing an unparalleled wealth, right? Through innovation. That was just so the success of the sciences in the West also encourages this connection between humanism and the sciences, and kind of humanism starts to take over the sciences, right, instead of Christianity. So what you get is the Enlightenment. Now, maybe at the heart of the Enlightenment is somebody like Descartes, right? Maybe you've all heard of him. What does he say? He defines the human being. He says, I think, therefore I am. Now what you want to notice there is notice the autonomy of the human being as he sees it. Since I have my own mind, I have my own ability to think, I do not need an authority to tell me what to do. I do not need an authority to tell me what's true. Okay. I don't need a corrupt apparatus, right? To have my own mind is now to be free from, shall we say, authority structures. I'm free to reinvent things, to change things. Okay. I'm autonomous. And so you get the beginning in secularism of the autonomous human being. Freedom means autonomy, okay, which means I can decide for myself, right? I can be active. And I can kind of change things, right? So we go from man as a mere creature who's just passive within the hierarchy to now in the Enlightenment, this secular man who is much more active. He can learn the natural laws, he can cooperate them, and he can produce success beyond his wildest dreams. Okay. Well, Benedict Ashley then points to a last kind of development that we've kind of seen here in the last century that he points to in changing, even going further with this humanism. It's not just defined by an autonomy from authority and the ability to cooperate with natural laws, right? So, and here you might think about the sciences. The Enlightenment was kind of defined by Isaac Newton. And I don't know how much you know about Isaac Newton, but Isaac Newton believes in natural laws. And he believed that these natural laws never change. And he always believed that the creating energy, the source of the creating energy, remained in God and in the Creator. It was distant from us. It was inaccessible from man. All man could do is kind of learn the laws of that creating energy and then cooperate with them, right? So he talked about, Isaac Newton used the language of creating energy as an energy at a distance. It was transcendent. It was inaccessible. And that's why he thought of the laws of that energy as being immutable. They never change. Okay? And he operated with that kind of notion. Inaccessible to us. So all we can do is kind of cooperate with them. Right? We can't do anything about them. Well, that's one of the huge changes that now happens with Einstein. That I think we're only beginning to understand what that change meant. Einstein rejects Newton's notion that creating energy is at a distance. Okay. Einstein points out that actually creating energy is right there in the atom itself. It's in matter itself. It's right there. And if it's immanent, if that creating energy is right there, within matter itself, within its very atom, then that energy can what? It can be accessed by us. And it may even be able to be controlled by us. I can take control of creating energy. Man doesn't need to merely cooperate anymore. He can actually take control of it. He can use it. He can redirect it. Okay. That's what I would call here, what we're facing is no longer a classical humanism that begins in Christianity or a secular humanism. We're now facing what we might call a demiurgic humanism. Okay? And here, this is my early church notion to you. Have you ever heard of the figure of the demiurge? You know what the demiurge is. In the ancient world, the demiurge is really the maker of the world from Plato's perspective or from the Gnostic perspective. The demiurge is the kind of creator, however, who can't create ex nihilo, like the true God, like the Christian understanding of God is created. But the demiurge can take what is there, matter. He can take what is given to him, and he can redirect it. He can shape it. He can give it form. He can control it. This is what man is beginning to do now. Right? And that what we're facing is this very optimism that man, and maybe this is the great question, I think, of demiurgic humanism. Can a man create or recreate himself? Can he, in fact, recreate the world in his own self? Demiurgic humanism is answering with an enthusiastic yes. It is happening through technology, through advances in how to use this energy that is in the atom. Right? We can, in fact, remake ourselves. There's a very optimistic outlook with science, therefore. Right? We can maybe achieve immortality. Keep putting off death indefinitely. Right? We can begin to now, we don't have to, even a change in evolution. I mean, we keep talking maybe against evolution, those arguments, but there's very few people that really want to just hold to a pure evolution, right? Evolution was a Newton kind of thing, where there is this natural evolution that's bigger than me, and I just have to cooperate with it and kind of go with where it goes. It's a force that's bigger than me. No longer, right? Now in demiurgic humanism, people believe that through technology, through our kind of knowledge of things, we can begin to, in fact, control our evolution. We can direct it toward the end we want to direct it. Right? So this demiurgic humanism, I think, also combined, I won't go into, but there's also here Freud and Kant that have changed things, right? One of the big changes that happened there was, Descartes in secular humanism always believed that we only see an order that's already in the world, right? So there's an order in the world, these natural laws, and we receive it, and then we understand it, right? No more. Right? With Freud and with Kant, you have the sense now, especially at the Immanuel Kant, that in fact what we do is we have the power, yes, we receive these kind of facts from the world, but we actually impose an order on them. The mind of man actually gives order to the world. The mind of man actually gives meaning to the facts that we learn. So again, the human being now becoming the one who's in control of what the world means, of what its order is, of what my own identity is. Okay. So let me just sum up for you more practically here what I think a lot of people today, what's going on in our culture, of how they understand themselves, and especially here, how they understand their human identity, which is kind of the big crisis in our age. What's it mean to be a human being? Can we, in fact, create ourselves? And maybe three things here in terms of how demiurgic humanism structures the human being. The first thing is that my identity, my human identity, is self-originating. My identity is within me and it is mine. Okay? I didn't quite generate it ex nihilo, like the Creator, but I do control it. It is mine, has its origin in me, it's mine uniquely. Okay. And where I come to know that identity at the depth of my being, and here's where kind of Freud has this huge influence, is he wants to seek that you come to know your identity by recognizing your passions. That is to say, your unique desires that run at the depth of your psyche. It's one of the things Freud emphasizes, right, is that we actually don't make decisions based on reason. This is where he disagrees with Descartes, and he disagrees with kind of the modernism of the Enlightenment. We don't, in fact, make decisions based upon our reason. We typically make them based upon our passion. We have driving forces that are deeper than our will or our decision-making. Right? We have hungers, we have thirst. The human being, to understand his identity, needs to get in touch with his desires, his passions. And of course, for him, he called these subconscious impulses, right? These subconscious is the heart of our identity. We need to come awareness. It's kind of the contradiction in Freud, right? How can you know that which is subconscious? By definition, what's subconscious means that you're not conscious of it. So that for Freud, the subconscious doesn't really do a good job of remaining subconscious. But you need to come to awareness of those impulses that are unique to you, those passions that are in there. So you begin with self-awareness, right? Do I understand that? So that's the first thing. The demiurgic human being his identity is self-originating. The second thing then, key thing, is that the human identity is self-directing. Here comes the emphasis on the will. Once I come to self-awareness of who I really am in my passions, in my desires, I then have to have the freedom and the capability to bring them to expression, to will them, to make them known in the world. And I need to be free to do that. Here's the emphasis on freedom from any external constraint. I have to have full freedom to give full expression to the depth of those impulses, whatever they are. Right? Which, we hear it a lot with regard to things maybe, with regard to homosexuality maybe, or transgenderism or something. And those are symptoms of this kind of perspective. But, the weakness here is if you go a little farther than that, right? Things like pedophilia. If I discover those impulses in me, I have to have the freedom to what? These are arguments that are starting to be made. I don't know if they'll really go anywhere because the emphasis today is on consensus between people. And, whether there'll ever be seen consensus there is another thing. But also things like, what do you do with the mass murderer who has the impulse to murder? Right? Shouldn't he be able to express that? That's who he is, right? Or I get cut off on the highway every now and then, with the traffic, and anger becomes who I am at that point, right? shouldn't I have the freedom to express that? And make that known in the world, right? So it leads to this kind of fragmented chaos a little bit, right? That I have to have the freedom and the technology. This is where the sciences, technology kind of cooperates with man being able to remake himself, being able to express himself, his craziest fantasies, right? So the demiurgic human is not only self-originating and self-directing, but the third one, and this probably is, to me, the big one. My identity is also self-fulfilling. It is up to me to bring it to its fulfillment. And I need to be able to bring it to fulfillment, right? Whatever my identity is, right? And that fulfillment is within the natural world. Okay? They're always going to seek, my identity has to be brought to fulfillment in the natural world itself. That's why there's such an emphasis. One of the changes that's happened is the emphasis is no longer so much on gaining possessions. There was an article about this, gaining possessions or just wealth in that sense. Now the emphasis is on fulfillment through experiences, right? Because they need to interact with my passions and my desires. So everybody has their bucket list, right? I've got to do these things to bring my identity to fulfillment. Otherwise, I won't feel like I've had a fulfilled, happy life. So I need to go to France and go in the Eiffel Tower or something. I was in a hotel room, I think this summer, and I was watching the news, and there's this. You can now. I mean, this is the way these things kind of operate, right? You can now have the experience of people are paying big money, evidently, to have dinner while suspended over the Amazon. Now, who would think up of something that kind of? Why would I need to do this? Right? Why is this experience? So you're always needing new experiences, right? So that I can say I've done it and I feel fulfilled. And it's, in other words, my happiness, my fulfillment up to me, up to my ability to express myself, and I need to have that capacity. Right? And that's what's always being sold to us, is this fulfilled life. So you watch commercials and you see the guy that he works and he makes $1 million during the day, and then he runs a marathon to stay in shape after work, and then he still has time to go up to the high-rise, up to the top of a skyscraper, meet with his friends and drink Michelob or something. It's a Michelob commercial. Don't you want to be this person? Well, that person doesn't exist. Nor is he ever going to exist. Right? But that's what's being sold to you, this ideal, fulfilled human being. Right? So that structure of human identity that a lot of people now have been kind of catechized into by our world, by the internet, everything, right, in many ways, is that my identity is my own, it's within me. It's up to me to direct it by my will, and my will needs to be free. And it's up to me to bring it to its fulfillment through these experiences. And I think as Christians, as we kind of react to this, I mean, we can diagnose a number of the problems here. Right? I mean, the first one, if your identity is within you, it leads to the fragmentation that we see all around us. We don't think of humanity as a whole anymore. Everybody has their own unique identity, right? Whether you divide that up racially, or you divide that up ethnically, or you divide that up in terms of desires, right? Even more important than the family is the family you find on the internet that agrees with your desires. So if I can find on the internet the people that resonate with my own passions, and I can kind of reorganize my own family around that, right? My true family. Okay. So the breakdown of the family, the fragmentation of humanity that's all around us, where we can't really share anything in common, don't really love anymore. So that fragmentation, that individualism, that individual autonomy is, you can see all around us. In regard to the will and my self-directing of my own identity, it leads to this quest for power. What defines the human being today is I need power. The more power I have, the more capacity my will has. And that power is given me by wealth. It's given to me by technology. It's given to me by political power, right? Who controls power? Who can impose themselves on the world? It also means that in relation to one another, I have the right to use and abuse another person for my own fulfillment. As long as we consent, we can mutually abuse one another for the sake of our mutual fulfillment. And that's okay, right? You do that for a time, you consent to it for a time, and you move out of that association into another. Right? So this kind of emphasis on power in the world to, in fact, make my identity come to expression. The third big thing with regard to fulfillment is the utter epidemic of depression we have in the West. I don't know if you've read any of these articles, but it remains the number one, and continues to increase, number one problem that nobody talks about is depression. This drives the whole drug thing, right? And, ways of dealing with that depression. Why are people depressed? Because no matter what they accomplish in the world, no matter what they seek in the world, it cannot bring fulfillment. There is no fulfillment for the human being within the natural world. You think there is, but there's not. You think, well, it'd be great if I had $1 million, but you get $1 million and then you start to think what? Kind of, to pay the taxes, I kind of need $2 million. And then you get $2 million and then you start to think, well, if I really want to be secure, it'd be better if I had 10. And you get 10 and you start thinking, yeah, but to really live the lifestyle I'd like, maybe $1 billion. And you get $1 billion and you start to think, well, I need to be able to go to Mars. I mean, there is no end to the desire of the human being. He's always going to want more. So there is no fulfillment, and since there is no fulfillment, people are depressed. I was reading an article about how impression increases the more you watch HGTV. Because what are you seeing on HGTV? You're seeing people buying islands, or somebody says, well, my budget's not that great for a new house. It's only, I have to kind of stay within 1.5 million or something. And so people are like, I'm never going to live that lifestyle. I'm never going to have that experience. Right? So it creates this envy and this depression that is an epidemic among us with this kind of understanding. So the question is, how do you kind of respond to it? And here, drawing on some of the things that I think we learn from the gospel, and how do we interact with this vision of the human person and stand against it? I think there's two things I would say to kind of avoid here. And I see it, and it's natural. There are natural reactions within Christianity. But I do think we want to resist them, or at least they're very inadequate. One reaction I always kind of see to it is a kind of, we kind of end up in a despair or a nostalgia for the past. Right, we see how much this demiurgic humanism is changing things. And our natural reaction, especially when you're an historian, is, boy, I wish we could go back to that time, to the early church, or to the way things were in the 16th century, the way things were in the medieval world, or the way things were in the 2nd century. Of course, I don't know that you'd want to go back to the 2nd century. Right? You have a kind of nostalgia that wants to go back and ends up kind of in despair of the modern world. Resist that. There is no going back. There was no utopia in the past. It didn't exist. Every age has had its difficulties. Christianity cannot look back. Right? It just won't work. What does Jesus say? Anybody who puts his hand to the plow for the kingdom of God and looks back is not fit for the kingdom of heaven. Christ offers us a vision of the future. If the gospel is about anything, it is about the eschaton. And we have a positive vision of the future to talk about. I have heard scholars tell me, well, you know, the Christian church goes forward by looking backwards. And there's always part of me that's always sympathetic with that as an historian. But I don't know about you. Have you ever tried that, going forward while you're looking backwards? You usually end up where? Running into something or on your backside. One of the two. It does not work. Okay. Christ is present with us. Christ isn't in the past. That's not where you're going to find him. Yes, he was with them, but he's also with you. So I would say avoid that. Right? The second thing I would avoid is we often I think Christians try to react to this by using, because the demiurgic man is about power, we want to fight power with power. Take over the government and the powers that be, right? Create Christian nationalism or something like that, that you get now kind of the response within evangelicals, which is a version of the millennial notion, right? We can reestablish utopia through power. Again, it won't work. The power of the state is simply the power to kill. That is not the power the church lives by. And you can't, I think it was I like this quip. I can't remember exactly where I heard it. I think it was on some TV show. I did. But at any rate, I liked it. It said, you cannot fight the darkness with a sword. You can swing your sword all you want in the darkness. Not going to do anything. The only way to fight darkness is with the light. We have to bear light to these people. And that is a different power. The church runs by the power of the resurrection, the power to raise the dead. That is why, yes, we may be in a position of weakness when it comes to earthly power, but we are not weak. As long as you have the body and blood of Christ, the gospel, the forgiveness of sins, holy baptism, you are not weak. You have within yourself and within your midst that power that is eternal, that generates eternal life. And so we have that which sustains, right? The word of the Lord, the grass may fade, but the word of the Lord remains forever. So we have to kind of recover that as where our power is, the power, therefore, that allows us to respond. But what I want to kind of encourage, therefore, is we have a positive view of the human being to offer people. We're not just interested in rejecting what they're talking about or kind of going back to the past or fighting power with power. We do have a positive view of human identity to offer people. A true identity that is stable, right? And so I might just correspond with that demiurgic humanism, this kind of threefold vision of the human being in front of you, of what we have to tell them. First of all, of course, identity is not self-originating. It's not within myself. human identity has its source in God. Okay. It doesn't come out of the earth or something, or out of the dirt simply, in some kind of evolutionary natural process, and it's not something I have and it's mine and I possess. It originates within God. Right? How did God create man? Yes, he forms him from the dust, but then he does what? Breathes into his face, right? His own breath. Man was created to be a theological being. That is to say, you were created for the Holy Trinity, to share in God's own life. That's an eternal identity. But it's also an identity that is given form, right? So we can talk to them about the origin of identity. This is what it means to be baptized. You have an identity that comes from God as your Father. This is what God intends for you. Right? Even the person that's a pagan, any human being was made that they might have God as their Father. So identity originates there, in God. That makes the human being's identity a mystery, that we don't really know fully what it's going to be. The second thing is also our human identity has a perfect form. It's not self-directing, but the perfect form of the human being is found in Jesus Christ. Right? The Son of God becomes man and shows us what it means to be human. That the human being was created to love. Christ, what is the form of his life? Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friend. He can deny himself. Right? He doesn't have to obey. He doesn't have to bring his passions to fruition. He can deny himself, take up his cross, and find his identity in his Father. So we need to start contemplating Jesus, not just that he's the Son of God who saves us, but that he is the perfect form of human life. Right? I always think, therefore, following the patterns, imitating the patterns of his life, his self-sacrifice, his self-giving, his mercy toward his neighbor, right? His love for mankind. That is the power that will overcome the powers of darkness. It's not going to be greater political power against them. It is to live and embody the power of the resurrection, the power of God's own law, right? That finally overcomes and manifests itself in the resurrection. And then the last one here, and I think maybe the big one, is our generation is very much into where do I find fulfillment, right? In finding fulfillment of my life, of my human identity. To teach them that fulfillment, there is no fulfillment to the human being within the natural world. Try as they might, they will not find it. As much as they want it, it's not going to be found in drugs or in alcohol or in pleasure or even eating over the Amazon or in all their wealth, right? Fulfillment, man was made to have his fulfillment in God and only in God. Right? This is the great temptation of Jesus. It's the temptation that goes back to the original sin. Right? The devil makes the forbidden fruit look pleasing to the eyes so that it awakens Eve's passion. She desires to be like God, which is what she should desire. She was made to be like God, in the image and likeness of God in Genesis 1:26. But the devil gets her to try to find fulfillment of that passion where? In that which God had not given, in the things of this world. And that leads her to death. Jesus faces the same temptation, right? The devil says what? When he's hungry in the desert? Turn it into bread, right? But what is Jesus' response? Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. His fulfillment, even of his hunger, is not in the earthly thing. It's actually why you pray when you eat. Because you're recognizing it's not in the food itself that I'm fulfilled, it's where? It's in the one who gives that food. Of course, perfected in some sense in the Eucharist, right? Which we'll have this morning. Anybody thinks that that little wafer, that little ounce of wine is going to fulfill you in some kind of materialistic way? Probably not. But where is the fulfillment? It's in the body and blood of Christ. Right? That eternal bread that truly satisfies. Right? So fulfillment is only in God. And we have that to offer them. Right? That fulfillment that overcomes death. That makes you free. Aren't you tired of being a slave to death, to man? Right? What dictates the human being, as long as you seek fulfillment in this world, is slavery. Right? Slavery to your passions, slavery to the things of this world. You'll never be able to get past death. Right? I don't care if you put it off for 900 years, or 1,000 years, or however long it takes. You're still in bondage to it. Right? In Christ there is the freedom of that life that overcomes death. We have that to offer. And we can testify to it by our self-sacrificing life, by our love of them, by our willing to give up things. Right? In other words, we have the freedom. The resurrection gives you the freedom to live an unfulfilled life in this world. The resurrection allows you to not eat over the Amazon and give up that idea. Right? Or to fast and then use the money that you would have spent to help your brother. Right? That's where fasting and almsgiving always went together. You can give that up, take that money and give it to the needy one. So we have that life to give them, that true identity of what they were made for. So you, now, earthly, in terms of earthly terms, you may look weak. But as long as you have Christ in your midst, you are not weak. Right? You have that power that overcomes death itself. All right, well, that's a little bit of my kind of perspective, and I've blathered on enough, I suppose. But any questions there? Just anything to kind of bring up here at the end? I guess I've kind of reached the end. But any questions on any of that or anything to bring up? Otherwise, really enjoyed being with you. Hope that it's been some blessing to you. And don't be afraid to pick up a little volume of some, find early church martyr stories. Don't be afraid to read them. Learn who they were, those kinds of things. I think it'll enrich your reading of the Bible and your own understanding of what it means to be a Christian. So, but wonderful to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. God bless you.